best of listeners, and welcome to the best real estate investing advice ever show. I'm Theo Hicks, and today we are speaking with Carla Cross. Carla, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's sunny. What could be better?
Perfect. Yeah, no, it is. It's a little dark in here, but I do have some sun coming in, so I feel you. So Carla is a repeat guest. She was a guest in our first year, episode 154. So being a repeat guest, we're going to do a skill set Sunday episode. But before we get into that, a refresher on who Carla is. She is a licensed real estate professional and author of 7 books for real estate professionals. She started investing in single family homes with her husband in the late 70s and is also the recipient of the National Association of Realtors Educator of the Year Award, which is going to be important for we talk about today. She's also she's based in Washington, Seattle, Washington, and you can say hi to her at her website, which is Carla with a C cross, also with a C.com. So Carla, before we jump into today's skill set, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and what you're focused on today?
Sure. I come from a very closely related field of real estate, music. I started playing piano when I was 4. And play by ear, and then took lessons, and I thought I was going to become a professional musician forever. I have a bachelor's in piano and a master's in music theory, but I couldn't really ever figure out what I loved to do in it, and I stumbled into real estate to help my husband when he was between radio DJ jobs. But I found out I love selling real estate. And those of you out there that are selling real estate or investing, you're probably doing it first because you love it, because there's something about it because it's a basic security issue. And don't we know that right now with COVID? There's nothing more important right now than people's security and the security of their homes. So I found I really loved it because music was wonderful, but nobody ever died for lack of music. So I don't think. So I went into real estate. I found I loved it. My husband went back into radio, but I stayed in real estate. I became a top salesperson, became a top manager. Then I started teaching classes all over the US and all over the world. And the books that you see in back of me, I actually wrote because I put them together as help tools for my agents first. So that's really how it started. I've mostly done work with real estate agents, but I did write a book. I don't know if you can see it back there, but it was for buyers. Buyer beware, insider secrets you have to know before you buy a home. And that was at the time when buyer agency was just starting, and there were a whole bunch of misconceptions about it, both from the public and the agents. So that's why I wrote the book, but all the rest of them have been for real estate professionals.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that. So the skill set of today is how to create a course, more specifically, how to create a course, a seminar that is online. So take it away. Let us know exactly where do we start
Sure.
if we want to create a course. I think the answer is pretty obvious, but how to actually do it might not be so obvious.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Obviously we have to. As I said, I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of writing. I help real estate professionals become certified trainers in the state of Washington, all over the US. And of course, all of us have had to go online. And I just did a webinar. By the way, if you want to see the webinar about some tips on taking your classroom online, you can just go to my website and go to free webinars and more, and you can see it. I'll say it again at the end, but it's a good overview of all the things you have to do. So what I discovered during that webinar was that about 90% of the classes that real estate professionals and affiliates, and that would be anybody like title people, all the people that teach the real estate people, 90% were live. We just weren't doing much online because we didn't have to. So all of a sudden, everything's online. But you can imagine it's kind of a fruit basket upset. The problem is, first of all, the classes, most of them aren't really classes. They're information dumps. And so for you out there, you can't take a course, you can't create a course online until you've created the whole format offline. Does that make sense? Because if you try to go online with it and you try to use all the gigas on any software like small groups or polls, you don't know where to put them. So you don't want to just, buy some software, rent it or whatever, course software, and then start in. You start by actually creating the course. So when you create the course, the first thing you do obviously is write down all the stuff you know, and then you organize it. And then you say, how am I going to teach this? So those of you who are watching, of the Zoom calls or courses or whatever you've watched online in the last 3 months, how many of them have been interesting? How many have been involving? Like when I asked the people on this webinar, and most of them were real estate trainers, I asked them how long they could focus on a 45-minute webinar. About 50% said only up to 10 minutes. Now, these are trainers. These are people who want the information. So basically what I'm saying is be really careful not to copy all these people that are doing all these online things are, because most of them actually are pretty awful. But I don't have to tell you that. You know that because you've had to watch them, right? So then what you want to do is think, I'm writing this course. And by the way, don't try to dump the whole load. Tell them everything you know. Figure out what you can do. This big rule, 45 minutes only. I think Theo's doing this interview. It's about 20 minutes, right, Theo? It's 25
Yep.
minutes. Okay, because that's enough. But you can get away with, a course, especially if you have time for questions, no more than 45 minutes. You're going to lose everybody and you're going to be exhausted. So 45-minute segments. That doesn't mean you have to do a whole course, just segments. So what do? You think about, what do I want to teach? What do I want them to walk away with at the end of 45 minutes? Not can I dump everything I know about everything, but what do I want? So think in segments. In the industry now, we call that micro-learning, where we're going deeper into something. Now, you can do an overview, but you're still going to have to involve them. So let's take a look at how you might involve them then, because you don't have them in the classroom. And one of the things that I've discovered by teaching a bunch of real estate people and affiliates is this. Like, we're good talkers. And we're pretty, and you know this, and Theo, you know this from interviewing a lot of us, we're pretty out there. I mean, at least when we're performing, we're performers, right? So it's easy for us to get interaction with a group or crowd. But now let's go online. Nobody's really there. And even though I can see Theo and Theo can see me, I don't get that physical energy because we're not really there. So now multiply that by the number of people you've got in your course or class or Zoom call. You don't have the energy. So what are you going to do to involve them? So let's say you've got your course, and if you were going to teach it live, you would ask them a question and they would talk, and that's called discussion. Well, if you try that and you got 50 people on a Zoom call, it's going to be really awful. So, and usually you have to mute everybody anyway, because dumb things happen. They go to the bathroom or their kids come in or whatever. So you got to mute them, right? So what do? Take that question you would ask, and talking about how to create that course. You could put a provocative question right at the beginning. And that question should give you some information as a springboard for you to go to the next thing. For instance, I talked to you about the question I asked of what percentage of your classes you taught in the before COVID were live. And this was to a whole bunch of real estate trainers. And again, they said 90%. What was that? That was my springboard. So I could go, yeah, and we can't do it now. So what the heck do we do? Because we can't just turn on the camera and talk. It's death. So you're going to ask a provocative question at the beginning of your course. And to get your answers, you're going to use polls if you can. If you're using Zoom, Zoom lets you use polls. So does, I use GoToWebinar for my webinars, but take a look at all those different platforms. Use the ones that give you the kind of abilities that you need to teach the way you want to. You've got to do more than just talk. So you're going to ask a provocative question, then you're going to take those answers and you're going to comment, and that's going to lead you to the next section. What else can you do besides polls? Don't beat the dead horse. Don't do too many. Don't do more than 3 or 5 in 45 minutes. I mean, they won't even respond. I had a really good trainer with me. By the way, when you're doing online, have somebody else there with you if possible. Also to do comments, to read what's coming in the chat, all that kind of stuff. Well, I have a really good trainer I work with. So she was keeping track of everything. And we were noting, even though, again, these were a bunch of trainers and you would think they'd want to tell us all this stuff, the biggest response we got was 70% of them. They answered. In other words, they answered the poll. Even though I thought those polls were like, hey, everybody want to answer this stuff. So why didn't they answer? Oh, they were doing other stuff. They weren't paying attention. So when you do your polls, no, you're probably not going to get them all, but shoot for a number you want to get, because that's going to give you your springboard to go forward. What else can you do? Well, in your live class, hopefully you're going to divide them in small groups and have them do some work. And by the way, learn how to use different kinds of teaching methods besides lecture and discussion, because you need to have those teaching methods written in your course to translate it to online. It's going to be a little different because you're going to use the software instead of using yourself inside the class. So let's say you want them to work on something. You can divide them into small groups and have them work on something and give you the reports back. That's a really cool thing to do. And one version of Zoom lets you do that. And I highly suggest you do that because, too, everybody likes to talk. So you want to give them a chance to talk to each other, but not always to you, because you can't control 50 people talking. So those are just 2 things that you can do when you're doing this online course. So what you always want to do too is, as you're watching these courses, and I watch lots of them, to see how they teach, not necessarily what I learn about everything, but how do they teach. So watch those and ask yourself, how could I put that in? For instance, the other day, this was pretty interesting. I saw one where the instructor said to people, get out of your chair and go find something in your office or home and come back and tell us what it means to you. I thought it was pretty clever, because you know how you sit in the chair and you're like, I gotta get out of here. So she literally had him get up, go find something, and tell the significance. Now, how could you use that in your course? Well, for instance, if I was teaching how to take my classroom online, I could have, because I'd have a bunch of instructors, I could have them go get something like a great book that they've read that they want to share, or one thing out of it. And then I could have them, everybody tell us, or I could put them in small groups and tell each other, and then have a report. I thought that was very brilliant, to be able to get people involved, but in a kind of a surprising way. I've only seen that done once, and I'm going to do it in some way. So I suggest that you think of things to get them out of their chair. I'm not watching really the time, so you tell me, Theo, how I'm doing time-wise.
You're doing great. Thanks for sharing all that. So I've got a few follow-up questions, and I kind of want to focus more on the first aspect of it, because you did elaborate in a lot of detail on the second part, which is actually how you teach it. So you mentioned that obviously the first step isn't to find a software, isn't to find some technology to use, but to actually create the course first. You said that to write everything down and then organize it.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know if I'm ready to teach a course? How do I know if I have enough information in my head to create a course?
Oh, that is a great question. When I said write everything down, yeah, I was really kind of making the assumption that we had a lot of information, right? Okay. What's really interesting is all of us are carrying around, I think, a lot more information about anything than we think we are. And when you start writing it down, in fact, I can't really grab it now, but I'm going to write a book on how to train and take those principles into online, just like we're talking about today. So when I did the proposal, I wrote down everything that I could think of about the course. Now, it didn't all come from me. Where did I go? I went to the notes on the webinars the notes I'd taken. So when you're going to do a course, let's say, Theo, you want to do a course and you're going, wow, I know people need to know this, but I don't think I know enough. What do? Just like you write a book, you do research. So you go, this is what I'd like. I don't have it. Excuse me. I don't have enough information in that aspect. So you go, do some research, get some books, look on the web, all that kind of stuff. You will surprise yourself. Here's the big mistake we make when we create courses, whether it's classroom or online. We make them too big. For instance, in real estate, people want to write a course on everything you need to know about listing property, and I've got an hour. No way. What about instead how to find people who might want to list their property? That's one module. So take those things apart and think about how deeply you want to go in each subject. As I said, you can do either an overview, or you can chunk it down and just do a bit of it and then go to the next one. Does that answer that question about how do you
100%.
have the info?
Yeah, and one thing I mean, Carla, I know you know this. I know this. Anyone who does podcasts or any sort of content knows this, is that you can talk about this. You can talk about one thing for way longer than you actually think. You can start. You can want to do a video on a perfect example would be the podcast that me and Travis do now, where we'll do a blog post that you can read in 30 seconds, so we can talk about it for half an hour and get through a third of the blog post. So I think that's something else too. It kind of goes on the same lines of, a lot more than you think. And then obviously if you don't have enough info, you can research it. So when you say write things down, like do you literally mean you sit in front of your computer and just start typing it out?
Oh yeah.
And
I just can't find I can't find my list of all the things that I wrote to do this proposal, because then what I had to do was, after I wrote them all, then I put them in some order.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. So I've got, my Word document. I've got my notebook full of notes. What's the best way to go about organizing it?
Well, there are several ways. One easy way is chronologically. For instance, my example of how to list property. Chronologically, the first part would be, how do you find people that want to list property? So you do chronologically is easy because it's through time. You can also do it by subject. Just, here's subject number 1, here's subject number 2. What's challenging is that when you're teaching somebody to do something, you have to be sure to teach them in the right order. I'm just teaching somebody, one of my friends, to read music, who's been a singer for many, many years. And she told, and she sung in all these groups all over the world. And she said to me the other day, I can't read music. I couldn't believe it, that she couldn't read music and she'd been able to do this. Well, I bought a book to go through with her because I do have a master's in music theory, but I thought, oh my gosh, I can't teach her all this unless I organize it and write it all down first. And I don't want to spend 6 months. So I bought the book. Guess what? The first thing this book teaches you to read music is the rhythm part. I wouldn't have started there. But there's a good reason why he started there. Doesn't remember, but he started there. So he started with the very simple principles of reading rhythm, and then he got more complex, and then he goes into reading notes. So sit down and say to yourself, if I'm going to teach somebody to do something, what's the right order? So how do you find out? You try it. I've taught piano and flute for many years. And boy, did I learn. Oh, well, and even teaching instructor development, you learn if you've got things out of order, because people go, well, I don't know that. I can't get that. I didn't understand. That means you weren't clear enough in your instructions and you didn't have them actually doing something with it. So that's a big part of it. I'd really suggest you too that you take in How to Teach course. I do have an online course and you can go to my website and see it if you want to. But that way you get all the principles I'm talking about, and you're not just guessing at these things. You know, oh, I'm starting this chronologically, and this is what I'm going to put in it, and this is why I'm going to put it in it, and these are the exercises I want, so I don't bore people to tears.
Perfect. All right, Carla, is there anything else you want to mention as it relates to creating an online course, or really anything else you want to tell people before we conclude the interview?
I think no matter what we do today, we're going to do it online, just like you and I are doing this online. And I know the first one we did was telephone, I believe. So, but we're all going to do these things, you know, FaceTime kind of thing. So no matter if you don't want to really create a course, all of these communication skills will help you. For instance, I own a real estate company also, and we're been teaching agents how to do online listing and buyer presentations, because so much of the agent's work now is not going to be face-to-face. So if you're an investor and you're working with an agent, and of course, having been licensed for all these years, I suggest obviously you always work with a great agent that you interview and that you screen. Don't just go to somebody because you saw them. But you want them to have great skills presenting remotely, because they probably will. So ask them that question. You know, tell me about the skills that you've got presenting. Do you have an online presentation? Show me. Because all heck can break loose if they don't know what they're doing and they're in your hands. So you learn this stuff to some extent so you can pass it on. The other thing that I'd say, and doesn't have to do with courses, but as Theo said, we've owned different kind of rentals for a number of years. And as I said, everybody's in security issues now. So with your tenants, be very kind to them, help them out any way you can. They will never forget you that way. It's really important right now. I'm finding that I'm doing a lot of things for tenants, not because I have to, but because I want to. And what I've also found is they really, really are responsive to that. They would really do anything for me and anything to stay there. So that's kind of an advice to you, just as a human being and as an investor or a landlord.
No, perfect. Thanks for sharing both pieces of advice. So Carla, thanks for joining us. You told us how to create an online course. Mentioned first to actually create the course, which involves writing everything down, and organizing it. Give us examples of organizing. And even if you think you don't have enough information to do a course, first, try writing it all out. And even if you don't know anything or don't know enough, you can always go out there and do research. That's what everyone does when they, whether they know things or not, they're gonna have to do some sort of research to do a course. So don't feel bad or like an imposter if you're doing research. And then the second step is to figure out the best way to teach it, to get the information out there. And gave us a lot of really good tips. I think the best one you gave was about the first two of them were, one, don't do a massive dump. Keep it short, and then have no problem doing like a 10-part course to keep things concise. And the second thing was some of the creative ways to get the audience involved when doing an online course. You should put provocative questions and then have a poll, divide them up, and have them do different exercises and then report back. Have them do things that gets them out of their chair, with the example of finding like a book or something in their house to talk about. So yeah, and then you mentioned at the beginning that if you go to your website, Carla with the C-cross.com, she has a webinar, free webinar, where you can, I would imagine, go into more details on this in 45 minutes. So make sure you check that out at her website. Again, thank you for joining us. Best ever listeners, as always, thank you for listening. Have a best ever day, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Great. Thank you, Theo. It was great.